እድለኞች ሆነን ዛሬ ተባርከንበታል፣ ተቀድሰንበታል። እግዚአብሔር ስሙ የተመሰገነ ይሁን። ይሄንን ነው ሁል ጊዜ እኛ ኢትዮጵያውያን ክብራችን ብዙ ነው። ቅድም በዝማሬ ሰምታችኋል። ኢትዮጵያ እጆቿን ወደ እግዚአብሔር ትዘረጋለች። ማንም ላይ በመጽሐፍ ቅዱስ ኢትዮጵያ እንደ ኢትዮጵያ መጽሐፍ ቅዱስ ያከበረው ሀገር የለም። አሁንም በንጉሥ ኃይለ ሥላሴ ምክንያት ይህንን ቤተ ክርስቲያን ይህንን መስቀል እንድንባረክበት ላደረገ ለአምላካችን እግዚአብሔር ክብርና ምስጋና ይግባው። በእውነተኛ የእግዚአብሔር ልጆች እኛ ኢትዮጵያውያን የሚያምርብን አንድ ስለሆን ነው፣ ስንለያይ አይደለም። እባካችሁ ልለምናችሁ የእግዚአብሔር ልጆች አንድነታችንን እናጠንክር።
ሰላም ጤና ይስጥልን። የኢትዮ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ ተከታታዮች እንደምን አላችሁ? ዛሬ እንግዲህ ከኦስትሪያ ቪየና ሁለት እንግዶችን ይዘንላችሁ መተናል። ኖቬምበር ላይ ማለት ነው፣ ህዳር ላይ የ70ኛ ዓመት ግርማዊነታቸው ቀዳማዊ ኃይለ ሥላሴ በቪየና ኦስትሪያ ጉብኝት አድርገው ነበር የዛሬ 70 ዓመት እና ያንን በተመለከተ ሲምፖዚየም አዘጋጅተው በዛም ሲምፖዚየም ላይ እጅግ የተለየ ሁኔታዎች ተፈጥረው የቤተክርስቲያን ትዕይንቶች እና ከዛም በላይ የሆኑትን ነገሮች ሊያስረዱን ሁለት እንግዶችን ጋብዘናል። እንግዶች ራሳቸውን እንዲያስተዋውቁ እንግዲህ እድሉን እሰጣለሁ። መጀመሪያ ወደ ማህሌት ይሄዳለሁ። ማህሌት ራስሽን ለኢትዮ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ ተከታታዮች እስቲ አስተዋውቂልን። ማህሌት ማናት እና በዚህ በተናገርኩት ፕሮግራም ላይ ደግሞ የነበረሽን ተሳትፎ።
ስሜ ማህሌት ሰለሞን እባላለሁ። የምኖረው በኦስትሪያ ነው። ከቪየና ትንሽ ከ45 ደቂቃ የሚወጣ ከተማ ትንሽ ቦታ ቦታ ነው የምኖረው። ያ በስራዬ ብዙ ነገር ነው፣ ግን ፕሮሞተር ኢቨንት ኦርጋናይዘር ነኝ በኢትዮጵያ በሚታወቅ ነገር። በዚህ ሲምፖዚየም ላይ አዘጋጁ ዶሚኒክ ነው ትልቁም ቦታ የሚወስደው። በዛ ላይ እኛ ይዘን የገባ ነው የአርት ስራ ነበረ። የአርት ስራ ማለት አይዞን ፋውንዴሽን ኢትዮጵያ የሚሰራበት ነበር። በዛ ውስጥ ዶሚኒክ አሳትፎናል። ግን ይሄ ሁኔታው አዘጋጅ የነበረው ሳይሆን ሳሜል ነው፣ ሁሉም ሰው አዘጋጅ ነበር ብዬ ያስባል። ዋናው ግን ሰብሳቢያችን ዶሚኒክ ነው።
Okay. Dominic, if you can introduce yourself to our audience and then tell us a little bit about the 70th anniversary of about the symposium and then how it came to be and your part in the event.
Yes, my name is Dominic Früht from the Department of African Studies of the University of Vienna, Austria. And we have at the University of Vienna Department of African Studies a Rastafari Reasonings project, a research project. And in this, we were thinking about that the 70th anniversary of His Majesty Haile Selassie I state visit was coming up in Austria. And we wanted to commemorate this anniversary because it was the first state visit to Austria in 1954. It was a whole world tour, as you know. It was also to the Western Hemisphere, but also in Europe, quite a few countries that were visited. And so since it was a first state visit to Austria after the Second World War, and even about 6 months before Austria had its own sovereignty back again, so we were aware that this was quite a significant part of Austrian history, and so we wanted to commemorate this, also raise awareness about this. The first state visit to Austria was an Ethiopian state visit, an African state visit, and this was important for Austrian history as well. And so that's why the whole idea came up. And of course, we have this Rastafari Reasonings project. So the idea came up through Rastafari Reasonings in the Rastafari community in Austria, and then we used this university project as a channel or as to facilitate this project to commemorate the 70th anniversary of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I's visit to Austria.
What can you tell us about a visit, like in history, how it was received? We know that Europe is not the same as it is right now, like So in 1954, it was a different Europe. So to receive, like I was trying to see like a news like that was done in the symposium, and then it reads that visit of King of Kings. So how did they receive King of Kings, like a black King of Kings from Africa? How it was like how the people, or even in the leadership, people received His Imperial Majesty.
It was very well received because of this historical significance, and people were aware of this. You have to see, as you say, in the historical context, and the historical context, people were very much aware that Austria was part of the Nazi regime, complicit in the Second World War, and that we were still occupied now by the Allied forces. We were occupied by the British, the English, the French, and the Soviet Union. And so people were very much aware that this is of great significance for their own sovereignty that they were fighting for at that time. Also, the whole historical significance. I mean, 1938, Austria was annexed by the German Empire.
Yeah.
And that was just, 38, 48. So that was just about 16 years prior to that. So all of that, also His Majesty speaking at the League of Nations in 1936, all of that was quite recent back then. People had it still in their living memories, all the history of the Second World War. And now living under occupation, they were aware that this was very important for them as a country again. And so they came out in thousands. So it was the main event happening at that time. The people were aware of it. They came out in thousands everywhere along. They lined the streets. You see it in some of the footage. And also the newspapers are reporting about it and realizing that significance. Some newspapers even realizing the significance of the whole historical context. Like in 1936, when His Majesty spoke at the League of Nations, some newspapers even informing the Austrian public that His Majesty made a prophecy back then, or made a prophetic speech, and that they should have listened to him. And if they had listened to him, they could have avoided all these catastrophes that had happened in their recent history, all that was leading up to the Second World War, and then throughout Second World War. So it was a great significance, and we also during the symposium were trying to understand that history a bit better. And for example, one of the professors that was speaking at the symposium was telling the audience about his own personal history of that his mother was going there in the street to witness this first state visit.
Yeah.
And for him also, it was very interesting because he said his mother never went to any other state visit. So this was the first state visit, but afterwards there were other state visits, and none of them had ever this impact or attracted so big crowds, because it was a historic significance, like also for Germany, the same. He also was the first state visit to Germany after the Second World War. And basically for the same reason, there was this so-called pariah status for Germany and Austria. They were kind of, after the Second World War, excluded from the international community. And nobody really dared to visit them, to include them again into the international community. And it was basically only His Majesty who could make this very important historical gesture, because Ethiopia was the first victim of fascism during, of course, as we know, Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia. Then Mussolini and Hitler joined forces shortly afterwards during summer of 1936, after His Majesty was addressing the League of Nations. So the warning that His Majesty gave to the League of Nations in the beginning of summer 1936, on the 30th of June 1936, was very relevant, because it was at that time when the world could still have interfered before Mussolini and Hitler joined forces. So, of course, we can only guess what the people at that time were aware of by reading the newspapers. So this is what we did. We read the newspapers from that time. And we were a bit surprised that there was a lot of information shared. So the people who went out into the streets in thousands, and not just when he arrived, everywhere in this 3-day visit where he went, they were in hundreds around the hotel. When he came back to the hotel where he stayed, they were chanting, they wanted to see him, and he came out on the balcony. So people were everywhere, and it was cold. It was late November, early December. And so it just had this impact. And we are also trying to understand basically what was going on at that time. And it must be explained through that historical context of the Second World War. The people were aware of the important role that Ethiopia and Haile Selassie in front of the League of Nations played in all of this. And then also of their now historical context where they were in at that time.
Yes.
And that was the Cold War. So in the Cold War, where they were all basically fighting against each other, the whole world was divided. This world tour of His Majesty gave the people this feeling of coming together again. It was a very, with a good intention, bringing all these world leaders together, visiting the world leaders. And I think through our research, that is what came out, what inspired the people. This was really an inspiring moment for them in that point of history.
Great. So I'm trying to understand. So you work in the University of Vienna in the African Studies. And so you said you were talking about the Rastafari and reasoning, and can you a little bit explain what it is, what the project is like?
The project full title is Rastafari Reasonings on Africa in Historical Perspective. Okay. Just realizing that Rastafari have made very important and very prominent contributions to understanding Rastafari history, African history, African presence, African future, African development. They have contributed some of the most prominent voices worldwide. So the idea was just that these voices should be heard within African studies. African studies being a Western academic discipline that comes out of colonialism. It was originally a colonial discipline. So it has all this colonial baggage. It's dealing with decolonization at the moment internationally. And therefore bringing in grassroots voices of any kind is very important. What do these grassroots voices themselves have to say about African history, African presence, African realities, African future? Very important. And through my personal connection, also Rastafari community worldwide, but also with the Rastafari community here in Austria, my connection was to Rastafari reasoning. So it's important to bring in African voices themselves in general. What we try to contribute is Rastafari voices, and through Rastafari voices is originally, of course, a lot of diasporan voices from the Caribbean, from the Western Hemisphere. So there they have already made important contributions to understanding that Africa is not just a landmass, but Africa is, as for example, Marcus Garvey is, of course, very important for Rastafari reasonings, would say that Africa is wherever Africans are. And so to see that also diasporan spaces have become African spaces over hundreds of years, for example, in the Western Hemisphere. And so this contribution is already important, and African studies has already been embracing that in a way that they include diasporan realities as African realities, to put more focus on this. Also, for example, Pan-African understanding. For example, Prince Asfavos Nazarate, who of course was part of this anniversary and symposium, emphasized that in in various instances that this is what he admires about Rastafari especially, and what he finds especially important, this Pan-African voice Rastafari has always emphasized. And so that is the idea of the research project, to say African studies should not be anymore this Western academic outside view that it has been for a long time, but it should include African voices. And as we say, some of the very important voices, some of the most prominent voices, especially through reggae music, Bob Marley, Pete Tosh, and so on, also influencing people about African realities, also about Ethiopia, has been Rastafari voices. Many people outside of Africa and also inside of Africa, you know, a whole young generation in Africa, they are, even if they are not Rastafari themselves, they are very much acquainted with Rastafari reasonings on Africa. How they view Africa is often very much influenced by Rastafari reasonings.
Yeah, because I always find myself trying to explain to Finnish friends, or like some random Finns that I meet on some workshops or somewhere. And whenever I try to talk about Ethiopia or I show them the flag, they relate it with like Rastafarians. And what you are saying right now is spot on, that they have represented African cause, also the Ethiopian cause, much more than like the Ethiopian diaspora is doing. That's not actually, that's a big point, a big thank you to the Rastafarian community. And how closely do you work with the Ethiopian community in Vienna and beyond?
So, of course, you know, through my personal interest, we have been to the Ethiopian church, always interested in the Ethiopian church as the oldest Christian church, actually. You know, I also did studies on it. I'm actually one who defends that Ethiopia is the oldest Christian church that we have, because Armenian church doesn't have the material evidence that the Ethiopian church has. For example, you know, we have the coins of King Esana and so on, but this is just a quick excursus on that. But through that, always been interested in the Ethiopian church, also, of course, being interested in Ethiopia and going to the Ethiopian church sometimes. And then when the idea for this came up, actually through Rastafari reasonings here in Vienna, that some in the community here said that actually 2024 will be 70th anniversary of His Majesty's visit. And that was already the first ideas for that came up in Rastafari reasonings here in Austria, I would say like around 2 years ago. And so then we had and then we were reasoning about it more, and we, of course, in the Rastafari community, people already had some of the sources, some of the newspaper articles from back then, and they knew some of the historical aspects of that visit. And for example, one aspect that then became important for us was that His Majesty gave this 13th century mescal to Stephansdom, which is the biggest cathedral in Austria. And being that Christianity here is the main religion, that means it is the biggest religious space in the whole of Austria. This cathedral is the biggest religious space. And he gave it to this church. And so it started slowly. We were interested to see that cross. We made contact. Of course, all of this was greatly helped and facilitated by me working for the African Studies Department, having this research project there. And so through this, we started to facilitate contact with actually first with this cathedral, you know, and asked them and said, well, you have this cross and we would be interested to know more about it. And then when they replied, very cooperative, then we said, okay, we have some contacts to the Ethiopian church in Austria. What would be possible? And they immediately offered that there could be possible celebration in the cathedral, because this was a gift by His Majesty to the cathedral, and it is an antique, valuable treasure, you can say. They were not able to, that the cross cannot leave the cathedral. But they were immediately offering us that a celebration in the cathedral can be possible. And they immediately were greatly understanding, because we explained to them, there is this whole also in African studies and beyond the restitution debate, which here is not really a case, because the cross was not stolen, it was a gift. But still immediately they were very aware of that and said, of course, we understand that this is not a museum piece. This is not something that should be just in the archives where it was, just in a safe somewhere. That this is a living, a religious instrument, you can say. And that they understood that, of course, the Ethiopian communities would like to use it. And then when we had this commitment from them, then now we were able to approach the Ethiopian churches. We have 2 Ethiopian churches in Vienna. That now we had a real tangible opportunity, and they were immediately happy to support this anniversary. And so, but that was already like then maybe a year ago. So the whole thing took time. We took that time because we were aware. We also knew in this whole context that I explained now with African studies and so on, that times have to change. This decolonizing of African studies has to be something that has to be taken really seriously and not just some superficial thing again. So we really wanted this to be a community effort, working together with the Ethiopian community, is getting to know each other, meeting the priests, sitting with them, reasoning with them, to really get everybody on board on their own terms. We didn't want to force anything on anybody, but really to have them, their contribution, them coming in. And then we had also some planning meetings with representatives from the cathedral, the bishops, and I know that these highest people that are in charge of the cathedral, representatives from both Ethiopian churches in Vienna came together. We had some of these meetings, and us, that was basically, we as university organized a symposium on the 28th of November. And where already the 2 Ethiopian churches also contributed. They made also speeches and presentations and so on. But for the church, we just wanted to facilitate, knowing that the university in Austria has a certain power, knew we could help facilitate this, and that is what it worked out. And we just then wanted the churches themselves to take the lead, and that was also accepted by the cathedral. And this is how then it worked out. It was organized and planned by the Ethiopian churches themselves, and it worked out very beautifully.
Yes, I've seen pictures and videos, and it looked really beautiful. And I've also read some of the comments that the churchgoers and the priests said, and they said that it was just, they couldn't even explain it in words. It was such a beautiful time and moment. Let me get back to my ያው እንደሰማሽው ስለ ቤተክርስቲያን ውስጥ ስለነበረው አከባበርና ሁኔታዎች እየገለጸልኝ ነበርና አንድ ካያቸው ከለክሽልኝ እንትኖች መካከል ሜቢ እዚህ ጋር መጥቀስ ፈልጌ ነበርና ምን ይላል? በትላንትናው ዕለት በታላቁ ስቴፋኖስ ዶም ያሳለፍነው ጊዜ በቃላት መግለጽ የሚከብድ ይሆናል። ህልም የሚመስል ግን ደግሞ እውነት የሆነ ተአምር አይተናል ብለው በጣም በሚገርም አይነት አማርኛ የገለጹ ስሜታቸውን የገለጹ ምዕመናን ቀሳውስት ነበሩና እስቲ ማለት ያው በተወሰነ መልኩ ራስሽን ስታስተዋውቂ ተሳትፎሽን ነግረሽን ነበር ግን ያው የላክሽውና ያየሁት አንድ ዜና ዘገባ ላይ እንደዚሁ ከላሊበላ ሬስቶራንት የሚባል ውስጥ የነበረውን የተወሰነ የሲምፖዚየሙ አካል የሆነውን ክፍልም አይተናልና ከዛ ጀምረሽ እስከ ቤተክርስቲያኑ ድረስ ያለውን ነገሮች እስቲ ንገሪን። የሆኑትን ነገሮች አንቺ ያየሻቸውን ያስደነቁሽን ሰዎች የነገሩሽን ደስታቸውን የሆነውን ነገር እስቲ ያስረጅ ንገሪን።
መልካም በጣም አመሰግናለሁ። ድረስ ለተጤውነት የሆነት ድንቅ ጊዜ ያሳለፍነው የሆነት እኔ ራሴ ኢቨንት ኦርጋናይዘር ነኝ። ከ10,000 እና ከዛ በላይም ሰዎች ያሉበት በቃ ሳቲስፋይድ ሆኛ ደስተኛ ነኝ ብዬ ያሳለፍኩባቸው ኢቨንቶች አድርጌያለሁ። ይሄኛው ግን እኔ እንጃ በቃላት መግለጽ ልክ እንደተጻፈው ያንን ቴክስት የጻፈው አሁን ላስገባው ፈልጌ ነበር ትንሽ ቫኬሽን ላይ ስላለ አቶ ሃይለ ያዛቸው እሱ በጣም ትልቅ ክሬዲት መውሰድ ያለበት ሰው ነው አቶ ሃይለ። በቤተክርስቲያኑ ሳይድ የነበረው እኔ ራሴ ዊትነስ ነኝ እንደ ሀበሻ ማለት ነው። ዶሚኒክ ትልቅ ስራ ሰርቷል የእውነት ግን ለኛ ደግሞ የነበረው እኔ ከምናገረው ይልቅ በኮሚኒቲ ውስጥ በእውነት ቦታ ያላቸው ሰዎች ቢናገሩት ደስ ይለኝ ነበር። ግን ይሄንን አሁን ያንን ጽሑፍ የጻፈው ሰው ሰብሳቢያችን እሱ ነው። ይሄንን ሁሉ ነገር የፈጠረው እሱ ነው። በቤተክርስቲያን በኢትዮጵያ ሳይድ ያለውን አንድ ጊዜ ካለ ለብቻውም ለተጠይ ኢንተርቪው ታደርገው ይችላል። አሁን ቫኬሽን ላይ ስለሆነ ነው ሰው የነበረው ጊዜ ከሲምፖዚየሙ ልጀምርልና እኔ ብዙ ጊዜ ተሳትፌያለሁ። ኢንተረስቲንግ የሆነ ሲምፖዚየም እንደዚህ አይነት ግን ድንቅ ጊዜ አልነበረም። ከ16 ሰዓት ጀምረን እስከ ማታ 22 ሰዓት ተኩል አካባቢ እዛው ነበርን። ሲያልቅ ራሱ ማለቁ ሁላችንም አጠረብን ያለው ሁሉም ኢትዮጵያዊው፣ ኤርትራዊው፣ ነጩ፣ ራስታው ላይክ ኢትዮጵያ እስከዛሬ 10 ምናምን የምናየው እንግዲህ ዴሞንስትሬሽን ነው ሰላማዊ ሰልፍ ነው እና የነበረው ጊዜ ይሄ ሁሉ ሰው ማለት ትልልቅ ሰዎችም ነበሩ በኢንተርናሽናል ደረጃ የሚማቸው ትልቅ የሆኑ ሰዎች እነዚህ ሰዎች ሁሉ ለከኢትዮጵያ እናፍቀዋታል እኛ ብቻ አይደለም እሱን አይቻለው። ድንቅ ጊዜ ነበር። በቃ እኔ እንደሰከረ ሰው ነኝ ስቲል ለምነግር እስካሁን ድረስ ደስታ ውስጥ ያለ እኔ ትንሽ ከከተማ ወጥቼ ስለምኖር የኔ ደስታ ብቻ መስሎኝ ቆጠብ አድርጌ ነበር ራሴ። በሚቀጥለው ቀን ግን ስቴፋንዶ መጀመሪያ ደረጃ ለኦስትሪያ እንደ ላሊበላ አይነት ቦታ ነው። በቃ ትልቁ ቦታቸው በአመት 1 ሚሊዮን ሰዎች ቱሪስቶች የሚያዩት ትልቅ በቃ ትልቅ ፊገር ነው ለኦስትሪያ። እዛው ገብተን ኢትዮጵያዊ ከበሮ ይዘው መዘመር ለኔ ብቻ ሳይሆን ለሁሉም ኢትዮጵያዊ
ለመጀመሪያ ጊዜ ነው እንደዛ የሆነው።
ሆኖ ማያውቅም። እንደዚህም ለተሰበሰበን አናውቅም። በድፍረት ባልናገርም እኔ ብቻ ያልኩት ሳይሆን ሁሉም አበሻ የተናገረው ነገር ነው። ይሄ የኔ ቃል አይደለም። በፌስቡክም ገብቶ ማየት ይቻላል የሰውን ደስታ። እኔ በበኩሌ ሁለት ተቀያይሜ ወያስቀምዬ የነበረውን ሰው ራሴ እጅ አቅፌ ሰላም ያልኩበት ቀን ነው። ገብቷል። ሁለት ቤተክርስቲያኖች ለ8 ዓመት አብረው ያለመለኩ ሰዎች ቸርች ሁለት ቤተክርስቲያን ሁለት አብረው አንድ ላይ መድረክ ላይ ማየት በጣም ትልቅ ነገር ነው። ይሄ የመስቀል ኃይል ነው ሁላችንም እናምነው። በቤተክርስቲያኑ የነበረ ነገር እነቁመት በቃ ለኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብ በቃ እንደዚህ አምሮን ዜና ላይ ተፈጠረ። ይሄን በትክክል እናገራለሁ። ስፔሻሊ ይሄ ፈርስት ዲስትሪክት ነው ገባ። ይሄ በጣም የቱሪስት ቦታ ላይ እንደዛ በሸቀልም ባንዲራችንን ለብሰን እኔ አዲስ አበባ ስትሪት ላይ ባንዲራውን ተብያለሁ። ግን እዚህ ጋር ግን ባንዲራችንን ለብሰን በቃ ሁላችንም ብቻ በናፍቆት ነበር። ሁሉም ነው የተለያየንም ሰዎች አይ ቲንክ በቃ ታይማችን አሁን የተማርኩት ምንድነው በቃ ሁላችንም እንዋደዳለን። በመሐላችን የሆነ ነገር አለ። it was amazing time። እኔ ፕራይቬት የተደረገው ማወቅ ከፈለክ ስንድር it's amazing። ለምሳሌ አንድ ጓደኛዬ በጣም ክሎዝ ጓደኛዬ ለ5 ወር ሆዷ ውስጥ ሐኪም የተከታተለች ሆዷ ይዝራት ለመጀመሪያ ጊዜ በልጇ በሆዷ ውስጥ ዘለለ መስቀሉ ፍቅር ሲገባን የሚል መዝሙር አለ። እሱ ሲጀመር ልጄ ሆዷ ውስጥ ዘለለ መታጇን ይዛ ነገረች። ልጄን ይዛ ነገረች። እንባዬ መፍሰስ ጀመረ። ከእንደገና ደግሞ እንደገና ስትስታለም መስቀሉንም ደፊልም እንደገና መጣና እኔ በቃ እግዚአብሔር ራሱ ምክንያት ነበረው ማለት ነው። ይሄና መስቀል 70 ዓመት እዛው ተቀምጦ በእነ ዶሚኒክ ምክንያት ዛሬ ወጥቶ እኛን አንድ ለማድረግ እኔም ደግሞ በስራዬ የእውነት ለምን እውነት ለምናገረው እኔ በቃ የኢትዮጵያኑን አልችለውም ጸቡን ምኑን ብዬ በምሰራው ስራ ኢንተርናሽናል ስራ አሁን ግን ወደ ህዝቤ እንመለስ ሐሳቦችን እንዳደረግ አሁን ትራቨል አድርጌ ጀርመን የመጣሁበትም ይሄን ነገር በሌላም ሀገር እንድንቀጥለው አንድነታችን ትልቅ እንዲሆን ከዚህ በላይ ደግሞ እኔ ከኔን አይደለም እዚህ ላይ ታላቅ ማጥምት ማድረግ የምፈልገው ደግሞ ከኛም ውጪ የሆነ ሰው ነው እሱን የሰበሰበን ይሄንን ትልቅ አርጎና ለኛም ትልቅ ትምህርት ነው ብያስባለሁ ፊሊንጉ እስክንድር ልነግርህ አልችልም እንደሌሎች ሰዎችም ቢገልጹት በጣም ደስ ይለኝ ነበር ያለውን ነገር ነው ባይተዋል
ነው ፎቶዎች አይቻለሁ ዘገባዎች አይቻለሁ
የሚገርም ድንቅ ጊዜ ነበር ሁሉም ሰው ተስማምቶ ማለት ዶሚኒክ አላሰበውም ነበር ስነግረው አይሶ ይበዛል ስለ ኢቭን 80 ሰው በቃም ቦታ እያለኝ ነበር ነው ትንሽ ነው የሚሆነው ግን የሚገርም ሁለት ቸርች መምጣት አለ ፕሮቴስታንቱ ሁሉም የሚገርም በቃ ኤሊት የሆኑት ኢትዮጵያን ግን ሁሉ ሰው ያውቃታል በቃ የሚገርም አይነት ጊዜ ነበር ከተለያየ ቦታ ከኬንት ድረስ ኢትዮጵያን ሌላ ጊዜ አላቸው ማለት ዴሞንስትሬሽንስ እንዳደረግ ይሄን ሁሉ ነጭ የተናገሩ እዚህ ላይ ግን የመጡት ለምሳሌ አሁን ያባባጃን እኔ በቪየና ላይ ስኖር ዘመንና አመሳት እናወዳድራለን ይሄ ለምሳሌ እንትና ዘመን ሁሉም እንትን ዘመን እየተባለ አሁን ያለሁበትን ቪየና ብዙ አመት ኖሬበታለሁ እና በዛን ዘመን አባባጃን የመተው ያደረጉት ለውጥ የነበረ ክብራችን ልዩ መሆኑን እዛ ቦታ ላይ በደንብ ይታያል ነው በኪንደርጋርተን ውስጥ የነበሩ ህፃናት ሆነው ያኔ የነበሩ አንድ ፒክቸር ይዘው ማለት ነው አንድ ፎቶ ይዘው ይሄ እኔ ነበርኩ ያሉ ነበር የሚመጡት ነው ዛሬ ያሉበት ከተለያየ ቦታ ግሩፕ ይዘው በቀና ያ ምን አስተማረኝ አንድነት ኃይል መሆኑ ሰላም ቢኖረን ደግሞ እንዴት ያማረች ሀገርና እንዴት ያማረ ታሪክ ያለን ህዝቦች መሆናችን አይችልበታል እስከኛው ይሄን ነው ምለው ነው
አው ሉል አስፋወሰንም እንትኑን የህፃናት ሙያውን ተመሳሳይ ነው በጀርመንኛ ስለነበር ዘገባው አላዳመጥኩም ግን ያው ቦታ ሲጎበኙ አይቻለውና ጃንሆ የጎበኙትን ቦታ ነው የጎበኙት መልሰው
ዶሚኒክ እንዲህ ያደረገው ራሱ ያልተናገረም በአመት ያደርጋሉ ወክ እየተነሳ በባጃኑ ያደረጉትን ይደግማሉ ያደርጉ ነበርና ያንን ነገር የደገሙ ሰዓቱን አላሳለፍንም እስከንደር 10 ሰዓት ጧት ነው ሳቸው የደረሱት እኛም የደረስነው 10 ሰዓት ጧት ነው ኪንደርጋርተን ላይ ቤተክርስቲያንም የደረሱበት 16 ሰዓት ከሰዓት ስለሆነ ነው ሰዓቱ በዛን ቀን የተደረገ ለነሱ ምን ነበርውና በሲምፖዚየሙ ላይ እሳቸው ነበሩ ብዙ ትልቅ ሰዎች ተናግረዋል ግን ከዛ ውስጥ አስፋወሰን አስራተ ያ እሳቸው ነበሩ በጣም የእሳቸው ንግግር ነው በሚገርም ሁኔታ እኔ በጣም ድሮም ማከብራቸዋለሁ እንደውም ሞር ሪስፔክት ትልቅ አስተምረውን አንድ አርገው ነው የሚናገሩት ንግግር የነበረው የእሳቸው ንግግር በእሳቸው በሶስት እግራቸው ቆሞ ማለት ነው የሚያስተምሩን ትምህርት ግን ማሪ ይገባል በቃ ማለት ይሄ ሁሉ 58 አመት ሀገር ወጣ ኖረ 58 አመት ሙሉ ታው ያሉን እየተመከሩን እያስተማሩናል በዚህ ሲምፖዚየም ደግሞ በጣም ትልቅ ትምህርት የሚጨበጥ የሚገባ ለምሳሌ ምነግር ወተን ምንም ብንጮህ የተረዳውት ነገር ማንሰማበት ነገር ለካ በዲሞን ዴሞንስትሬሽን ሳይሆን የምንሰማው በሲምፖዚየም መሆኑን ተማርኩኝ ማለት ነው ለምን ጥሩ ሰዎች ሰው ሳይጮህ ቁጭ ብለው ፕሮቴክሽን ኖሯቸው ሴፍቲ ተጠብቆ ቁጭ ብለው የምንሰማበት ያኔ እሳቸው ተናግረው ሲጨርሱ ሰው ሁሉ እየመጣ ጀርመን ስኩል ሄዱ ብዙ ትልቅ ሰዎች ነበሩ ይጠይቁኝ ነበር እንዴት ነው እውነት ነው ይሄ ነገር ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ ገብቷልና ያለውን ነገር ደግሞ ያለን ነገር ችግራችንንም ደስታችንንም እነዚህ ሰዎችም ፓርት ኦፍ ኢትዮጵያ ናቸው ብያስባለሁና አድሬስ አድርገው ለሳቸው ትልቁን ቦታ ሰጣለሁ ዶክተር ላስፋወስን አስራቴ በሚቀጥለው ቀን ኪንደርጋርተን ላይ አሁን ብዙዎቻችን ማናቀው ለዶሚኒክ ናቸው የሚያስተምሩኝ እዛም ቦታ ላይ ከመቶ እርግጠኛ ባለው ዶሚኒክ እንደገና ጠይቀው ደስ ይለኛል ብዙ ገንዘብ አፈፋጫ ነው ፈንድ አድርገዋል ለዚህ ኪንደርጋርተን ነው በጣም ድንቅ የሆነ ኪንደርጋርተን ነው እኔ ልጆቼ ክፍለ ሀገር ነው የሚሄዱት የዚህኛው ግን ለየት ያለ ነው። በጣም ጥሩ ወጥተዋል። አሁን በሳቸው ዘመን የነበሩት በሙሉ መጥተው ነበር በሲምፖዚየም ላይ ግሩፕ ላይ ነበሩት እና
በህፃን የነበሩ በወቅቱ ማለት ነው።
አዎ ፎቶቸውን ይዘው መጥተዋል። ይሄኛው እኔ ነኝ እልክልሃለሁ፣ ይሄኛው እኔ ነኝ እያሉ የፎቶንም ክብር አየሁ። እኛ ቤት ብዙ የድሮ ፎቶዎች አታገኝም። እነሱ አንድ ፎቶ አባባጃንን በህይወታቸው ላይ ትልቅ ቦታ ሰጥተው እንደገና ደግሞ በዛን ጊዜ የነበረች ኪንደርጋርደኗ እዛ ውስጥ የነበረች ምሰራ ሴት በማሆን አርጅተዋል። እሳቸውም ረጅም በፕሮጀክተር አድርገው ትልቅ ትምህርት አስተምረውናል። ምን ይመስሉ እንደነበር አባባጃን ምን ያህል ልጆችን ይወዱ እንደነበር ብዙ ሰዎች ቪዚት አድርገው ነበር ነው የምትለው ሴት። ኪንደርጋርደኑ ትንሽ ለየት ያለ ፓላስ ውስጥ ያለ ኪንደርጋርደን ነው እና ሲመጡ ግን ዝም ብለው አይተው ጎብኝተው ነው የሚሄዱት መሆን ስላለበት። እሳቸው ግን ኢንተረስትድ ነበሩ ስለ ልጆቻቸው፣ ስለ እያንዳንዱ ነገር የሳሉትን ስዕል ጎንበስ ብሎ አውርተው እና በቃ ሳያቸው ያለች ነበር። በቃ አይናቸው ራሱ ላይ ትልቅ የሆነ ፓወርፉል ሰው እንደነበሩ በቃ ሁሉ ሰው የሚመሰክረው የ90 ዓመት ሴት ሰው ፕሮፓጋንዳ በጣም የሚደንቅ ጊዜ ነበረ። የኪንደርጋርደኑ ቪዚት፣ የሲምፖዚየሙ፣ የቸርቹ
Yeah. If you can tell us about the kindergarten visit, the history of it, and then also yes. When Prince Asfawasan also came and visited it again.
Yes, so His Majesty visited a kindergarten for children with disabilities when he visited in 1954. And that also put some focus in the media on this, not just this kindergarten for children with disabilities, but on the topic and issue in itself. And that was again very much in the historical context, because Austria, as being part of the Nazi regime during the Second World War, had a very dark history with persecuting and murdering children with disabilities. So as a reaction to this, a very direct reaction to this kindergarten was founded after the Second World War to kind of address these atrocities that had happened during the Nazi regime, and how to, it was one of the leading kindergartens in Europe for children with disabilities, and to show how children with disabilities should actually be treated, that they get the right education and the right care and also the protection. And so now when His Majesty visited this kindergarten, it put a very important focus on this whole issue that we must remember was not even 10 years before. So all these people, they had very lively and vivid memories of the Nazi regime. And of course, many in the Austrian public were even involved in that. So there was a lot of reckoning going on at that time. And when His Majesty visited the kindergarten was for children with different disabilities. That kind of, it on the one hand, it was this kind of reckoning with the very dark history that was not even 10 years before. Mm-hmm. And also, like His Majesty did in many of his actions, on the one hand is a certain reckoning, you could say even a certain judgment. On the other hand, he gives a brighter perspective for the future. And so we were very intrigued for a long time, the Austrian Rastafari community with this kindergarten visit. And so we found a few of the kindergarten children from back then who were there when His Majesty visited, who even have pictures with His Majesty. They are treasured memories. They immediately showed us these pictures that they had with, and it was great then to have them there, because we even also found a kindergarten teacher. Of course, she was back then an adult, so she could remember it much more and also understand the significance in that time much better. But she's now 96 years old and living in Switzerland, so she could not be there in person, but I also had a Zoom interview with her and we showed part of that interview at the symposium as well. She was greatly impressed by His Majesty, and not just by him as a person, but by the significance this visit had in this historical context. But for us now in the Austrian context, it was very significant that the first state visit to Austria put that focus in the national media. It was all over the newspapers, the different magazines, and also in the news coverage. And the kindergarten teacher from that time told us that, you know, back then people didn't have a television, but they went to the cinema, and this news are shown before the movies in the cinemas. Every cinema was showing this, and she said it had a great impact and it made a great change for a country that came out of this evil brainwash just not even 10 years before, that children with disabilities should actually be exterminated, to showing them in this humane way that they should be protected, that they should be cared for their needs. And that was His Majesty's accomplishment at that time.
So was it like the 70th anniversary? Was it the first time that it was celebrated? Or when was the last time it was?
It was the first time that it was celebrated in that sense. Yeah. But especially Rastafari community has always been celebrating it, but in a very small way. Some people already tried to do. There was a publication also from the Rastafari community. Some people connected to the Rastafari community who collected back then already some of the newspaper articles and put them together. Yeah. It was already, I think, for the 50th anniversary. So already 20 years ago. But this was the first time that there were big public celebrations for the anniversary. And we also just want this to be something that we initiated. There will come a 75th anniversary. There will come a centenary one day, you know. This is, we will continue to work on this. You know, for example, we would like to see by the Austrian television a documentary about it. Now, what was done was us and the Austrian television covered it. We want eventually a full-blown documentary about it. And this was a step in this direction to impress on the Austrian public, the Austrian media, and hopefully eventually also on the Austrian government. Austrian television should be interested in covering this, because Austrian television is doing documentaries on all kind of different aspects of Austrian history, but not on the first state visit, the very first state visit to Austria. It is totally underappreciated. So next year there will be a lot of celebrations for 70th anniversary of Austrian sovereignty, the Austrian State Treaty. And we already wanted to start this with raising awareness that first state visit to Austria, which was African state visit, the Ethiopian state visit, was contributing to this. I was checking some of the publications about the Austrian state treaty, Austrian sovereignty. They don't even mention. And yet when we read the newspapers, and that state visit was the first opportunity that was given to the Austrian government on an international level to show and prove that they were able to keep security and order, and they don't need the occupation army, because none of the occupation authorities was included in the state visit, which is also interesting because you know, we were still ruled by occupation authorities.
When we talk about this, the celebration of the anniversary, now what came into my mind is that I think it's BBC who is trying to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this Live Aid, and it has a huge outcry now in the social media where people are saying that why do you need to, you know, make an anniversary over like some dark history. There are some prominent figures who are like coming out and saying that this colonial mentality is still there, and So it makes me wonder, like now, I'm glad that this story is finally is coming like to the forefront, and then I hope that it continues and then it gets more attention by even the Ethiopian government as well. Like it should not only the Austrian government. አሁን ከዚህ ሴሌብሬሽኑ ማለት ነው ከነበረው እንትን ምንድን ነው አሁን ሁለት ቤተክርስቲያኖች ነበሩ ቅድም ብለሻል እና ያው ሁለት የሆኑበትን ምክንያት መናገር ከተቻለና ከዛ ምን አተረፈን ብለሽ ታስቢያለሽ ከዚህ ከነበረው ጊዜ ቆይታ?
እንዳልኩትም አቶ ኃይሉ ያዛቸው ቢኖር ደስ ላይ ነበረ እሱ ሊገባልን አልቻለም ግን እኔ እንደ ካየሁት እንደ ኢትዮጵያዊ ከተሰማኝ በጣም ሴንሲቲቭ ፓርት ስለሆነ ነው ይሄን ነገር ግን እንደምናየው እንደምትውለት ቸርች ተለያይቶ ነበር በሶሻል ሚዲያ የሚታይ ነበር yes በጣም ያ ችግር ነበር የዛን ቀን ሊገኙ የነበረው አንድ ቤተክርስቲያን ብቻ ነው ይሄንን ደግሞ ደምተመት ይችላል የነበረው ሐሳብ ያ ነበር ግን በሚገርም ሁኔታ በቃ ለዚህ ትልቅ የሰራው እግዚአብሔር ነው ከዛ ቀጥሎ ኃይሉ ከዛ ያንን ሰው መጥቶ በአንድ ላይ ሁለት ቤተክርስቲያን አንድ ላይ ቆሞ በአንድ መድረክ ላይ ከ8 ዓመት በኋላ አንድ ላይ አመለኩ አባቶችም የሆኑት ሁለቱም እንደውም ልክልሃለሁ አንደኛው አባት ንግግር በጣም ላይክ እንደ ፕሪስት ሳይሆን እንደ ዴሞንስትሬሽን ነበር ንግግራቸው ልክልሆነ አላስታውስም በጣም በደስታ ልክልሃለሁ አሁን በጣም ይገርም በጣም አይኖርለት በጣም ያየሁት ነገር በጣም ሰላም ወጣ በቃ ይሄ ሰላም ደግሞ ሊቀጥል የሚገባ ሰላም ነው ቤተክርስቲያን አስታራቂ ናት ቤተክርስቲያን ሰብሳቢያችን ኤምባሲያችን ናት በሄድም ባልሄድም ብዙ ልጆችን ማስጠመቅበት ነው ሁላችንም በህይወት እና ብናል ምንም እኛ ኤምባሲ የለንም አውስትራሊያ እና አንድ ላይ ሆነዋል በዚህ በቃ መስቀሉ እንግዲህ በሶሻል ሚዲያም ትልቅ ሰዎች እናቶችን ፕሩፍ ያደርጉልኝ ነው እየደወሉ ላይክ ምንድርክ ላይክ አንድ ሳምንት የሚያክል እረፍት አልነበረኝም እንደጠጣ ሰው ነው የነበርኩት ምን አይነት ደስታ እንደነበር ልገልጽና አልችልምና የቤተክርስቲያኑ ጉዳይ እውነት የሚደንቅ ድንቅ ነገር ሆኗል ይሄን ደግሞ የኔ ብቻ ምስክርነት ሰው በጣም ብዙ ሰዎች ማለት ውዱድ ጊዜ የሚሄዱ ሰዎች በቃ በጣም ደስ በሚል ሁኔታ በአንድ ላይ አምልከናል እሱ ሁሉ ነገር ድንቅ ነው ስቴፋን ዶምስ ተከተል ኢትዮጵያውያን ተሰብስበን እናመልካለን የሚል ቀን አስቤው ማላቀም አይሁላችንም እና በጣም ድንቅ ጊዜ ነበር ለኔ እንትን ሰጥቶኛል ዳይሬክሽን ሰጥቶኝ አነሳስቶኛል ሰላም ማለት ሰላም ለሰው ልጅ በጣም ወሳኝ ነገር ነው ሰላም ሲኖር ልጆቻችን እዚህ ቢገናኙ ሰላም ሲኖር እኛ የምንገናኘው በሁሉ መንገድና በጣም ደስ የሚል ሰላም ወንበር እንዳልኩ በቃ ያገኘው ሰው የምታቅፍበት ቀን የለም የምታቀው ማታቀበት ነጭውን ጥቁር ማለት በቃ ሰው አሜዚንግ ጊዜ የሚገርም ድንቅ ጊዜ ነው ቤተክርስቲያኑ ደግሞ አንድ ላይ ሆኖ አንድ ላይ 8 ዓመት የተለያየ ቤተክርስቲያን አንድ ላይ ባንድ መድረክ ሲቆሙ ማለት ወይ በዛው ደግሞ እንደዛው ሆኖ እንዲቀጥልልን እግዚአብሔርን ጠይቃለሁ
በጣም ደስ ይላል አዎ በጣም ደስ ይላል ያው ጊዜ እንዳንወስድ ያንቺንም የዶሚኒክን ሜቢ ካንቺ ጋር ሌላ ጊዜ እንገናኛለን ብዬ ተስፋ አደርጋለሁ ምክንያቱም ልታካፊ የምትችያቸው ብዙ ታሪኮች እንዳሉሽ ከዚህ በፊትም ኮንታክት አድርገን ነበርና ስለሱ ስለ ጥንካሬ ስለምኖች የምናወራበት ሌላ ጊዜ አዘጋጅተን እንገናኛለን ያንን እናረጋለን ዛሬ ግን ስለሰጠሽን ጊዜ ይሄን ኦርጋናይዝ ስላረግሽና እንደዚህ ሌሎች ሁሉም ኢትዮጵያውያን እንዲያውቁት ስላደረግሽ እጅግ በጣም አመሰግናለሁ and Dominic thank you so much for your time and thank you for the work that you are doing I really hope that the Ethiopian community inside and abroad gets to hear this story and then puts the story in the forefront so that all everybody who is interested can listen to it. And then I hope that, I don't know if it's available for a visit, if it's on a display, the cross in the Stephan's Dome, but hopefully that would be something that people would go and try to visit the cathedral in Vienna. But thank you so much for your time, and if you have a final word.
Yes, thank you also for being interested in our efforts here in Austria and supporting our efforts as well. And we will continue here as well. As I said, there is every year coming an anniversary. We will work further with the Ethiopian communities and also with the cathedral that has the cross, that this was not just a one-time event, but what we can do in the future. And we also hope that we can inspire others, because we know His Majesty on his 1954 travel, he gifted other cathedrals throughout Europe also crosses. And so we hope that there can be a revival of His Majesty's visit, that people can revisit again the importance it has, and that it cannot only have an importance back then in 1954, but through that, through now people coming up and celebrating this again, remembering these gifts like the crosses throughout Europe and other gifts that He has given us, to celebrate this and to put a new focus on 20 years later, 75 years later, and so on in the future.
ዶሚኒክ ደክሞታል ቴንኪው በማለት በጣም ሳደርገው ይዋለው አሁንም ግን እንደገና በጣም አመሰግናለሁ ዶሚኒክ ዳንከ ዶሚኒክ for alles wirklich du hast so toll gemacht ich sag das nochmal ያ በጣም አመሰግናለሁ ዶሚኒክ ቀጥሎም አንተን እጅግ አመሰግናለሁ እስክንድር ይሄንንም ደግሞ መልበት ብዙ ሚዲያዎችን የሚያስተላልፉት ነገር በሚታየው ከሆነ ይሄ በቃ መልካም ያልሆነ ነገሮች ብቻ ነው 3-4 ሚዲያዎችንም ካንተ ኩል ሜሴጅ አድርጌያለሁ የሰላም ነገር ፈልገህ መለስክልኝ አንተ ነህ እና ለሌሎቹ አድሬስ ማደርገው የሰላም ነገር ብናደርግ የሰላም ሰዎች ከንቀልፋቸው ሲነሱ ደስ የሚል ኒውስ ሳይሆን ደስ የሚል ቀን ይውላሉና በተቻለ መጠን ደግሞ የኢግኖር እንዳይዘጉ ሁሉንም መልካም የሆነ እኛ ጋር ብቻ አይደለም መልካም ነገር ብዙ ሰው ጋር ይኖራል ያስባለሁ መልካም የሆነውን ነገር ደግሞ ፕሮሞት እናድርግ በተረፈ ደግሞ ይሄ ነገር ይቀጥላል ሰላም ለሁላችን ሰላም ለኢትዮጵያ
አሜን እሺ አሜን ሰላም ሁኑ አመሰግናለሁ
good night bye